Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud while stoned. So, here we go. Today, we're going to do part 2 of Little Blue Book number 61, titled, What is Religion? Written by Leo Tolstoy. Oh, pardon me. So, I think we left off, starting at chapter 6. Pardon me. And here we go. Inequality among men, not only as clergy and laity, but also as rich and poor, masters and slaves, is established by the church Christian religion as definitely and glaringly as by other religions. Yet, judging by what we know of Christian teaching, in its earliest form in the Gospels, it would seem that the chief methods had been foreseen, and a clear warning against them had been uttered. Against a priestly caste, it was plainly said that no man may be of perversion made use of in other religions, the teacher of another. Call no man your father, neither be ye called masters. Against attributing sanctity to books, it was said that the spirit is important, but not the letter. That man should not believe in human traditions, and that all the law and the prophets, that is, all the books regarded as sacred writings, amount only to this, that we should do to others as we wish them to do unto us. If nothing is said against miracles, and if in the Gospels themselves miracles are described, which Jesus is supposed to have performed, it is nevertheless evident from the whole spirit of the teaching that Jesus based the proof of the validity of his doctrine not in miracles, but on the merits of the teaching itself. If any man willeth to do his will, he shall know of the teaching, whether it be of God, or whether I speak from myself. And above all, Christianity proclaims the equality of men, no longer merely as a deduction from man's relation to the infinite, but as a basic doctrine of the brotherhood of all men, resulting from their being acknowledged as sons of God. It seems, therefore, as though it should have been impossible to pervert Christianity so as to destroy the consciousness of equality among men. But the human mind is subtle, and perhaps unconsciously or semi-consciously, a quite new dodge was devised to make the warnings contained in the Gospels and this plain pronouncement of equality among men inoperative. This dodge consisted in attributing infallibility not only to certain writings, but also to a certain set of men called the Church, who have a right to hand on this infallibility to people they themselves select. A slight addition to the Gospels was invented, telling how Christ, when about to go up into the sky, handed over to certain men the exclusive right, not merely to teach others divine truth, according to the literal text of the Gospel. He bequeathed at the same time the right, not generally utilized, of being invulnerable by snakes and poisons, but also to decide which people should be saved or the reverse, and above all, to confer this power on others. And the result was that as soon as this idea of a church was firmly established, all the gospel warnings hindering the perversion of Christ's teachings became inoperative. For the church was superior both to reason and to the writings esteemed sacred. Reason was acknowledged to be the source of errors, and the Gospels were explained not as common sense demanded, but as suited those who constituted the church. And so, all three former methods of perverting religion, a priesthood, miracles, and the infallibility of scriptures, were admitted in full force into Christianity. Intermediaries between God and man were admitted because the need and fitness of having such intermediaries was recognized by the church. The validity of miracles was acknowledged because the infallible church testified to them, and the sanctity of the Bible was acknowledged because it was acknowledged by the church. And Christianity was perverted as all other religions had been, but with a difference, that just because Christianity was most clearly proclaimed its fundamental principle, the equality of all men as sons of God, it was necessary, most forcibly, to pervert its whole teaching in order to hide this fundamental principle. And by the help of this conception of a church, this has been done to a greater extent than in any other religion, so that really no religion has ever preached things so evidently incompatible with reason and with contemporary knowledge, or so immoral as the doctrines preached by church Christianity. Not to speak of all the absurdities of the Old Testament, such as the creation of light before the sun, the creation of the world 6,000 years ago, the housing of all the animals in the ark, or of the many immortal horrors such as injunctions to massacre children and whole populations at God's command, not to speak even of the absurd sacrament, of which Voltaire used to say that though there have been and are many absurd religious doctrines, there never before was one in which the chief act of religion consisted in eating one's own God. Not to dwell on all that, what can be more absurd than that the Mother of God was both a mother and a virgin, that the sky opened up and a voice spoke from up there, that Christ flew into the sky and sits somewhere up there at the right hand of his Father, or that God is both one and three, not three gods like Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, but one, and yet three? And what can be more immoral than the terrible doctrine that an angry and revengeful God punishes all men for Adam's sin, and sent his Son on earth to save them, knowing beforehand that men would kill him, and would therefore be damned, and that salvation from sin consists in being baptized or in believing that all these things really happened, and that the Son of God was killed by men, that men might be saved, and that God will punish with eternal torments those who do not believe this? So that, leaving aside things some people consider as additions to the chief dogmas of this religion, things such as various relics, icons of various mothers of God, prayers asking for favors and addressed to saints, each of whom has his own speciality, and not to speak also of the Protestant doctrine of predestination, the very foundations of this religion, admitted by all and formulated in a niche creed, and so absurd and immoral, and run so counter to right feeling and to common sense that men cannot believe in them. Men may repeat any form of words with their lips, but they cannot believe things that have no meaning. It is possible to say with one's lips, I believe the world was created 6,000 years ago, or I believe Christ flew up into the sky and sat down next to his Father, or God is one and at the same time three. But no one can believe these things, for the words have no sense. And therefore, man of our modern world, who professes this perverted form of Christianity, really believe in nothing at all. And that is the peculiar characteristic of our time. And that's the end of chapter 6. So, hydrate. Chapter 7. People in our time do not believe in anything yet. Using a false definition of faith, which they take from the epistle to the Hebrews, wrongly ascribed to Paul, they imagine they have faith. Faith, according to that definition, is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Hebrews. But not to mention the fact that faith cannot be a substance. It is a mental condition and not an objective reality. Faith is also not the evidence of things not seen. For the evidence referred to in the epistle, as the context shows, is simply credulity. And credulity and faith are two different things. Faith is neither hope nor credulity, but a special state of the soul, Faith is man's consciousness that his position in the world is such as obliges him to do certain things. Man acts in accord with his faith, not because, as is said in our Russian catechism, he believes in the unseen as in the seen, nor because he hopes to attain his expectation, but only because, having defined his position in the universe, he naturally acts according to that position. An agriculturalist cultivates the land, and a navigator sets out to sea, not because, as the Catechism says, they believe in the unseen or hope to receive a reward for their activity. Such hope exists, but it is not what guides them, but because they consider that activity to be their calling. So also a religiously believing man acts in a certain way, not because he believes in the unseen or expects a reward for his activity, but because, having understood his position in the universe, he naturally acts in accord with that position. If a man has decided that his position in society is that of a laborer, an artisan, an official, or a merchant, then he considers it necessary to work, and as a laborer, an artisan, an official, or a merchant, he does his work. Just so do men in general, who, one way or another, have defined their position in the world, necessarily and naturally act in accord with that definition, which sometimes is rather a dim consciousness than a definition. Thus, for instance, a man having defined his position in the world as that of a member of a nation chosen by God, which, in order to enjoy God's protection, must fulfill his demands, will live in such a way as to fulfill those demands. Another man, having defined his position on the supposition that he has passed and is passing through various forms of existence, and that on his actions more or less depends his better or worse future, will be guided in life by that definition. And the conduct of a third man, who has defined his position as that of a chance combination of atoms, in which a consciousness has been temporarily kindled, which must be extinguished forever, will differ from that of the two first. The conduct of these men will be quite different, because they have defined their positions differently. That is to say, they have different faiths. Faith is the same thing as religion, only with this difference, that by the word religion we imply something observed outside us, while what we call faith is the same thing, only experienced by man within himself. Faith is a relation man is conscious of. Faith is a relation man is conscious of towards the infinite universe, and from this relation the direction of his activity results, and, therefore, true faith is never irrational or incompatible with present-day knowledge, and it cannot be its characteristic to be supernatural or absurd, as people suppose, and as was expressed by a father of the church who said, "Credo crea absurdium," I believe because it is absurd. On the contrary, the assertions of true faith, though they cannot be proved, neither contain anything contrary to reason or incompatible with human knowledge, but always explain that in life which, without the conception supplied by faith, would appear irrational and contradictory. Thus, for instance, an ancient Hebrew, believing in a supreme, eternal, all-powerful being who created the universe, the world, the animals, man, etc., and who has promised to patronize his people if they will keep his law, did not believe in anything irrational or incompatible with his knowledge, but, on the contrary, this faith explained to him many things in life which without such a faith would have been inexplicable to him. In the same way, a Hindu who believes that our souls have lived in animals and that, according to the good or evil life led, they pass into higher or lower animals, by the help of this faith explains to himself many things that without it would be inexplicable to him. It is the same with a man who considers life an evil, and the aim of life to be peace attainable by the annihilation of desire. He believes in nothing unreasonable, but, on the contrary, in something that makes his outlook on life more reasonable than it was without that faith. It is the same with a true Christian, who believes that God is the spiritual father of all men, and that the highest human blessedness is attainable by man when he acknowledges his sonship to God and the brotherhood of all mankind. All these faiths, if they cannot be demonstrated, are in themselves not irrational, but on the contrary, give a more rational meaning to occurrences in life which without them seem irrational and contradictory. Moreover, all these beliefs, by defining man's position in the universe, inevitably demand conduct in accord with that position. And therefore, if a religious teaching asserts irrational positions which explain nothing, but only help to confuse man's understanding of life, then it is not a faith, but only a perversion of faith, which has already lost the chief characteristic of true faith, and instead of demanding anything from men, has become their pliant tool. One of the chief distinctions between true faith and its perversion is that in the perverted faith, man demands that God, in return for sacrifices and prayers, should fulfill his wishes and serve man. But in a true faith, man feels that God demands from him the fulfillment of his will, demands that man should serve God. And just this faith is lacking among the men of our time. They do not even understand what it is like. And by faith, they mean either repeating with their lips what is given to them as the essence of faith, or the performance of ceremonies, which, as church Christianity teaches, help them to attain their desires. And that's the end of chapter 7. Hydrate, kids. My chair needs oiled. It's squeaky. Okay, here we go. Chapter 8. People in our world live without any faith. One part, the educated, wealthy minority, having freed themselves from the church hypnotism, believe in nothing at all, and look upon every faith as an absurdity or as merely a useful means of keeping the masses in subjection. The immense poor, uneducated majority, consisting of people who, with few exceptions, are really sincere, being still under the hypnotism of the church, think they believe in what is suggested to them as a faith, although it is not really a faith. For instead of elucidating to man his position in the world, it only darkens it. This situation and the relations of the non-believing, insincere minority to the hypnotized majority are the conditions which shape the life of our so-called Christian world. And this life, both of the minority which holds in its hands the means of hypnotization and of the hypnotized majority, is terrible both on account of the cruelty and immorality of the ruling classes and of the crushed and stupefied condition of the great working masses. Never at any period of religious decline has the neglect and forgetfulness of the chief characteristics of all religion, and of Christianity in particular, the principle of human equality, fallen to so low a level as it has descended to in our time. A chief cause in our time of the terrible cruelty of man to man, besides the complete absence of religion, is the refined complexity of life, which hides from men the consequences of their actions. However cruel the Atlases and Genghis Khans and their followers may have been, the process of personally killing people face to face must have been unpleasant to them, and the consequences of the slaughter must have been still more unpleasant. The lamentations of the kindred of the slain, the presence of the corpses, so that the consequences of their cruelty tended to diminish it. But today, we kill people by so complex a transition, and the consequences of our cruelty are so carefully removed and hidden from us, that there are no effects tending to restrain cruelty, and the cruelty of one set of men towards another is ever increasing and increasing till it has reached dimensions it never attained before. I think that nowadays, if I do not say some prominent villain such as Nero, but some most ordinary man of business wished to make a pond of human blood for diseased rich people to bathe in, when ordered to do so by their learned medical advisers, he would not be prevented from arranging it, if only he observed the accepted and respectable forms, that is, did not use violence to make people shed their blood, but got them into such a position that they could not live without shedding it. And if, also, he engaged priests and scientists, the former to consecrate the new pond as they consecrate cannons, ironclads, prisons, and gallows, and the latter to find proofs of the necessity of the and justifiability of such an institution as they have found proofs of the necessity for wars and brothels. The fundamental principles of all religion, the equality of men, is so forgotten, neglected, and buried under all sorts of absurd dogmas in the religion now professed, and in science this same inequality in the theory of the struggle for existence and survival of the fittest is so acknowledged to be a necessary condition of life, that the destruction of millions of human lives for the convenience of a ruling minority is considered a most usual and necessary event, and is continually going on. Men of today do not know how to express sufficient delight over the splendid, unprecedented, colossal progress achieved by technical science during the 19th century. There is no doubt that never in history was such material progress made in mastering the powers of nature as during the 19th century. But, also, there is no doubt that never in history was there such an example of immoral life, freed from any force restraining man's animal inclinations, as that given by our ever-increasingly bastardized Christian humanity. The material progress achieved in the 19th century has really been great, but that progress has been bought, and is being bought by such neglect of the most elementary demands of morality as humanity never before was guilty of, even in the days of Genghis Khan, Attila, or Nero. There is no doubt that the ironclads, railroads, printing presses, tunnels, phonographs, Reutenrays, and so forth are very good. They are all very good. But what are also good as Ruskin says, beyond comparison with anything else, are human lives, such as those which millions are now mercilessly ruined for the acquisition of ironclads, railways, and tunnels, which instead of beautifying life, disfigure it. To this the usual reply is that appliances are always being invented, and will with time be invented, to check such destruction of human life as is now going on. But this is untrue. As long as men do not consider all men their brothers, and do not consider human lives the most sacred of all things, on no account to be sacrificed, since to support them is the very first and most immediate of duties, that is, as long as men do not treat each other religiously, they will always, for the sake of personal advantage, ruin one another's lives. No one will be so silly as to agree to spend thousands of pounds if he can attain the same end by spending £100. With a few hundred lives that are at his disposal, the same number of people are crushed each year, and the owners of the railroads quite naturally do not adopt appliances which would prevent these people from being crushed, for they have calculated that the annual payments to the injured and to their families come to less than the interest on the cost of such appliances. Very possibly, these men who ruin human lives for their own profit may be shamed by public opinion, or otherwise compelled to provide the appliances. But as long as men are not religious, and do their deeds to be seen of men and not in the sight of God, they will, after providing appliances in one place to secure people's lives, in other matters again, treat human lives as the best material out of which to make a profit. It is easy to conquer nature and to build railways. It is easy to conquer nature and to build railways, steamers, museums, and so forth, if one does not spare human lives. The Egyptian pharaohs were proud of their pyramids, and we are delighted with them, forgetting the millions of slaves' lives that were sacrificed for their erection. And in the same way, we are delighted with our exhibition palaces, ironclads, and transoceanic cables, forgetting with what we pay for these things. We should not feel proud of all this, till it is all done by free men and not by slaves. Christian nations have conquered and subdued the American Indians, Hindus, and Africans, and are now conquering and subduing the Chinese, and are proud of doing so. But really, these conquests and subjugations do not result from the Christian nations being spiritually superior to these conquered, but, counterwise, from their being spiritually far inferior to them. Leaving the Hindus and Chinese out of account, even among the Zulus, there were and still are some sort of obligatory religious rulers, describing them certain actions and forbidding others. But among our Christian nations there are none at all. Rome conquered the world just when Rome had freed itself from every religion. The same, only in a greater degree, is the case now with the Christian nations. They are all in one and the same condition of having rejected religion, and therefore, notwithstanding disseminations among themselves, they are all united and form one confederate band of robbers, among whom theft, plunder, depravity, and murder, individually or collectively, goes on without ceasing, the least compunction of conscience, and even with the greatest self-complacency, as occurred the other day in China. Some believe in nothing and are proud of it. Others pretend to believe in what they, for their own advantage, hypnotize the common folk into accepting as a faith, while others, again, the great majority, the common people as a whole, accept as a faith the hypnotic suggestions to which they are subjected, and slavishly submit to all that is demanded of them by the dominant and unbelieving hypnotizers. And what these hypnotizers demand is what Nero and all like him, who had tried in some way to fill the emptiness of their lives, have always demanded: the satisfaction of their insane and super-sounding luxury. Luxury is obtained in no other way than by enslaving men, and as soon as there is enslavement, luxury increases. And the increase of luxury inevitably drags after it an increase of slavery. For only people who are cold and hungry and bound down by want will continue all their lives long, doing not what they want, but what is wanted only for the pleasure of their masters. And that is the end of chapter 7. 7? Yeah. Boy, I forget, was it 7 or 8 now? 8. Yeah, chapter 8. And I think we'll stop there. And we'll pick up in part 3 at chapter 9. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in part 3.